Elevated pigeon variations are an extremely effective and accessible way to improve glute flexibility and hip external rotation. Yet more often than not, I see the execution of them completely butchered, and we're not truly getting what we want out of them. Here are 3 of the most common compensations I tend to see and ways we can bias more lengthening at the glutes and lateral hip so we can improve genuine hip external rotation. So the first compensation in pigeon is the femur will actually abduct, meaning the knee moves outside the hip. What we're essentially doing is stealing some range in external rotation by lengthening the adductors. And yes, abduction does couple with external rotation. And when we're trying to express max range in these compound shapes, then we want to use help from as much different muscles as possible. So if we actually want to bring more length in the lateral hip, we're going to need to bring the femur in the sagittal plane and bring the knee directly in front of the hip joint. Or for an even greater stretch, we can shift the hip outside of the knee, but making sure our belly button isn't turning away. And the belly button should be turned forward or even slightly toward this working side knee. If you're using a loaded stretch like a pigeon good morning, it's okay if the knee starts outside the hip, but as you're going down, think about shifting that hip outside of the knee, and you can even drop your shoulder and twist your belly button toward that working side, and you should feel a ton of lengthening in that lateral hip. If this is a limiting factor for you in your side split or double pigeon, then this should have significant carryover for you when you put the pieces back together and train those compound shapes. Now the second compensation is we choose too high of an elevation to start with, and now we're unable to anterior pelvic tilt, and we don't have any leverage to now fold our torso over top of the femur. Instead, choose a lower elevation to start with, and keep the back leg in extension, which will drag the lumbar spine in extension, and allow us to maintain that anterior pelvic tilt as we fold forward, and we can create much better leverage this way. Another option is to start on the floor with the knee directly under the hip, and we can spin the heel in to bring us into as much external rotation that we have available currently. And now from here, we can sit back from this space and create that anterior pelvic tilt. And as we rotate through, we can try to shift that hip outside of the knee and then drive the knee through the ground to come back to center. From here, we can try to get as light as possible on the hands and think about falling forward so we can really use the glutes to resist that hip extension. And the last compensation is the inability to maintain a 90-degree knee angle. And this won't allow for the optimum line of pull for the hip rotators and will significantly decrease leverage to lengthen these tissues adequately. So what we can do is simply add an elevation for the knee so that we can maintain this 90-degree knee angle so we can effectively stretch the glutes. And an incline bench works extremely well for this exact reason. Now, a common complaint with pigeon stretching is lateral knee pain, and this is primarily due to the excess torque on the fibular head for those who are missing tibial internal rotation, or if you just have extremely tight glutes. Now, yes, we can isolate tibial internal rotation in the meantime. The way we can immediately mitigate stress on the lateral knee is simply by actively dorsiflexing the foot, which will evert the foot, and it'll draw the tibia into external rotation, which will decrease that tibial internal rotation demand when we have a plantar flexed ankle, and thus decrease the stress on the lateral knee immediately. So I really hope this was useful for you in your pigeon practice. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments.